Well, this is Sunday.
August 11th.
What?
The 11th.
The 11th. Well, August the 11th. Okay, I'll take your word for it. I got this expensive phone and I still can't tell what the date is.
21 today?
No,
20.
20.
Not 21 yet.
Well, today we're going to go back on to the schedule of looking at all the prophecies in the Bible that I think are interesting. This is lesson number 230, and we're in 1 Samuel. So today we'll review lesson 229. I got some signs of the times. You probably have a few yourself. And some scriptures of the day, and then we'll do prophecies in 1 Samuel. So, Dean, open us with a word of prayer.
We just thank you, Heavenly Father, for Carl's class. I've learned to hear more about prophets than any class I've been to. So grateful for him and Marilyn. We ask you to maybe glorify you each and every day. And forgive us where we fail you, Heavenly Father. Just guide and direct us. And may the Holy Spirit be with us today and learn more about your word. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Okay, our last lesson was about Ruth, but we also talked about David and Uriah and how David had an adulterous relationship with Uriah's wife Bathsheba, and then tried to cover it up, had Uriah killed, which goes to show you no good deed goes unpunished.
He didn't do it by himself, though.
Well, he had a lot of unindicted co-conspirators.
Yeah, right.
And then Prophet Nathan shows up and gives him the story about the rich man and the poor man, and the poor man had the little ewe lamb, and the rich man had herds of lambs, sheep. And the rich man took the poor man's lamb and slaughtered it and gave it to a traveler who happened to be coming by. And David was incensed at the whole story and thought, boy, that was an awful thing to do. Let me find this guy. We're going to put him to death. And then those famous words, David, thou art the man. Ooh, that's got to hurt. So David was convicted of his evil ways, and we saw where that lamb was a type of the Messiah, which was loved by the common man, but hated by the rich and powerful. And then, of course, we heard the story of Ruth. And the long and the short of Ruth is Boaz was the kinsman redeemer. And just like we have a kinsman redeemer, and all the characters in the book of Ruth have a parallel. Naomi was what? Who was the parallel of Naomi? Anybody? Nobody was awake. No, that was Israel. Now Ruth, what was she? She was an Ammonite, right? She was a Goyim. She was a Gentile. It was a type of the church. So, and Ruth's story was, Naomi was, whither thou goest, I will go. And it's almost like the church is, initially, Naomi told Ruth about Boaz, but in the end, Ruth told Naomi about Boaz and who he was, and she ended up marrying him. And, well, it's kind of the joy of the church, isn't it? The church is going to end up being married to the kinsman redeemer. Which brings up an interesting question. What's the purpose of getting married anyway? Have offspring. Do you suppose there's some offspring in the future for the church and the Redeemer?
That was a long time ago.
It was?
Do that nowadays without marriage.
I guess we've progressed since then.
There will be a new heaven and a new earth, right?
Yeah, a new heaven and a new earth, and it says in Isaiah that the increase of his government shall be without end. Well, if the increase is going to be without end, where is the increase coming from? Interesting point to ponder. I don't have any answers. I just got a lot of good.
More people.
I don't know.
Warming and.
Yeah, with global warming, we're probably going to all die anyway. 11
12
years
years,
and
11.
4 months and 37 days.
Less than 12 years now.
Who's keeping track?
Yeah, but who's watching? Okay, dozens of foxes seen early in the morning near Kosel. Well, that word Kosel is Kotel, and that is, well, it's where the Holy of Holies and the temple is located. At least they think it was located there. And was picked up by some of the Jewish folks. For the past 3 consecutive days, dozens of foxes have been observed entering and exiting the south of the western corner of the Kosel from dawn till sunrise. And the scene immediately reminds one of the famous Gemara. Well, it didn't remind me of anything, but it said it would seem that the appearance of these foxes in contemporary times is indicative of a similar consolation, a message sent to us from Hashim. Who is Hashim? Well, the Jews, according to the 10 Commandments, do not use the name of the Lord in vain. So they don't use the name of the Lord at all, because for fear of using his name in vain. So they call his name Hashim, which means the name. So they don't really say his name, they just use the name. So Hashim, not to worry about the prophet Zechariah will soon be fulfilled. So the Talmud relates as follows. Once Rabbi Gamliel, Rabbi Eliezer ben Azara, and Rabbi Yehoshua and Rabbi Akiva were arising in Jerusalem, at the point where they had reached the Har HaBasis. They were observed that a fox had exited from the Kodesh HaKodeshim. And what is the Kodesh? Very good. Somebody was listening.
What did he say?
Holy of Holies.
The others were crying, but the Rabbi Akiva was laughing. And he asked of him, "Why are you laughing?" And he responded, "Why are you crying?" And they said to him, "A place upon where it is written, the stranger that approaches shall surely die. Now that foxes have overridden it, why shouldn't we cry?" And he said to them, "That's precisely why I'm laughing." The verse tied the prophecy of Zechariah with the prophecy of Uriah. Regarding Uriah, it is written, "Therefore, because of you, Zion shall be a field that is threshed." And in the book of Zechariah, it's also written, "Older men and older women will yet sit in the streets of Jerusalem." Until the prophecy of Uriah be fulfilled, I was afraid the prophecy of Zechariah would not necessarily be fulfilled. And now that the one's fulfilled, the other one's going to be fulfilled. So the logic was that if the bad news is being fulfilled, there's bound to be some good news coming shortly. It's like that optimistic kid who got a room full of horse manure. And the parents said, "Why did you do that?" And the little boy was in there just happy as could be. And he said, "Well, with all that horse manure in there's got to be a pony somewhere." That has parallels in politics too. MSNBC guest says he wants pitchforks and torches outside the pro-Trump Equinox chairman's house. I guess you know the story there, right? Mm-hmm. It's getting to the point now, if you even so much as think positively about Trump, you're a racist.
It's an extension of the BDS.
Oh, sure.
I think so.
That they're trying to, the force on Israel to boycott, disinvest, and.
Disinvest and we got to attack these people
They want you
because
to boycott, disinvest, and isolate and destroy anyone who doesn't agree with you.
Right, exactly.
that's who is it? Who is the guy who wrote the book?
Ayn Rand?
No.
Orwell?
No, Rules for Radicals.
Oh, Saul Alinsky.
Saul Alinsky. Yeah. That's part of his strategy, And by the way, did you know who he dedicated that book to? Satan.
Satan.
Oh, but I repeat myself.
Well,
Like-
and I was gonna say, that is who Satan is. He likes to divide and he likes to keep people from the truth, because if you don't know the truth, he can convince you of other things. But if you know the truth, he's done. So this, I mean, everything playing out, it's all lies intended to
Lies,
separate.
deceit, deception, that's the modus operandi of at least one. And you know, the Republicans are not much better, but they're a little bit better anyway. So at any rate, you know the story with this guy.
I don't know if anybody were really formally boycotting, are we?
No, we typically don't do that. You know, it used to be that if you had a difference with a political party or a candidate, you resolved that in the voting booth, right?
That's right.
Yeah, but you can't do that anymore.
You can't do that anymore because if you get the wrong guy in there, all the powers of hell are turned against him.
Yep.
And we have, this government of ours, we didn't realize how corrupted that it was.
That's right.
And we just had an interesting dilemma, too. We got a guy who had the goods on all of the big boys up there in the world, named Jeffrey Epstein. And he was going to sing like a bird. Well, he ain't singing anymore.
Sure.
And how did that happen? In a federal prison with guards that are supposed to be visiting him every 30 minutes.
Did you see a picture of his last visitor?
What was his name? Was his name Clinton?
Yeah.
There was a meme on Facebook. It was Hillary with sunglasses and a mustache. His last visitor.
Carl, I
Yeah.
just want to say, he's either alive or he's dead. If he's alive, we took him for his protection. So, you know, all that witness protection.
Well, hey, that would be pretty sneaky, wouldn't it? I can't envision that have happened, but you never know.
You can lay on a gurney, can't you? I mean, you know.
Well, that would be
Well, we
pretty
did know
good.
this, though. When he got arrested and all this happened, I said to William immediately, I said, they had better watch him because somebody's going to kill him. They are going to kill him.
Sure.
And
I
sure enough,
think QAnon made reference to that they were after him.
Well, everybody knew they would kill him.
Everybody except, well, you weren't supposed to know.
Yeah.
That was supposed to be a
And
secret.
when he had 12 days ago, whatever, suicide attempt, he told them then, somebody's trying to kill me.
Yeah. But, and then he was on suicide watch for 6 days, and then they took him off on the 7th day.
That's not a person you take off.
and how much you want to make a bet that they say, oh, well, we don't have anything on video for whatever reason, the
The
video.
video wasn't working.
Yeah.
The video wasn't working. We had a power outage.
Excuse,
Oh, and they told the three guards, or 2 guards, 3 hours before he died to take off. They were gonna clean it, they were gonna clean that area, to just take off. I mean, that's what I read.
Well, nothing surprises me anymore. Yeah, Dean?
say, you know, the Democratic Party 30 years ago was a lot different than what they are now.
Oh, man.
Well, so,
They might not have been great, but I mean, they're a lot different than what they are now. They can't
Well-
do nothing else but, what do they call it, oh, crap. No, what I'm saying, the only thing you get on Trump is, I lost my,
That's exactly what they can get on Trump.
Well, and
nothing.
well, the thing is, though, there's
Oh,
more,
shit.
it's not just Democrats implicated in this pedophile ring. So it's quite possible
That
that
both sides
it
are
was
trying
both
to-
sides got together and said, we gotta get rid of this guy.
In the last 15 or 20 years, how many sitting congressmen and senators retired
Right.
when they knew they could be reelected? How many?
A bunch.
Oh, well, no, not about in the last 15 or 20 years, none of them did. But in the last 5 years, suddenly, everybody's retiring. And the message there is somebody had something on them and they were told to either get out or you're going to be, well, the light will be shined on you. Somebody's pulling the string somewhere. I guess we'll find out someday, maybe, I don't know. But at any rate, back to the story here. You know, this NBC guy, he recommends that you show up with pitchforks and torches in front of the guy's house who supported Trump. And by the way, he was having a fundraiser for Trump. They were supposed to raise $11 million, and they raised $12 million.
and then,
You know, that must be frustrating
Did
for
you
the
hear what
lad.
happened to that poor Bill Miller in San Antonio after he got outed by Joaquin Castro?
He had so much
Business
business, he couldn't
blew up.
stand it.
The Chick-fil-A syndrome.
The Chick-fil-A syndrome.
That's right.
I remember when they pulled that on Chick-fil-A because there was one of them right down the street from me where I worked. And I went there at lunch on purpose. The line was down the street. Really?
Yes.
I think, isn't that funny? So the mainstream media is way out of touch with a lot of the folks here. So
They're calling them stalwarts. And
stalwarts.
when they send their talking points out, here's what we need you stalwarts to do. And I didn't have time to flesh it out, so I'm counting on you to do it. Send them to the internet, Twitter, Facebook, with their talking points and tell them to flesh it out. It's just
Very interesting. I also heard an interesting story about that too, that there is some source in the CIA that at 4 o'clock every morning sends a set of talking points out to all the mainstream media heads. Do you notice how the mainstream media bunch always uses the same terms and phrases? Same verbiage everywhere. We knew there was a common source for it. I didn't know it was coming from the CIA. Oh, guess who's back in the news? There's your favorite Maharishi. Iran's Khomeini urges the Hajj pilgrims to oppose U.S. Israel-Palestinian plan.
Pitchforks and
Show
torches.
yeah.
Maybe he's getting the same talking point.
He's got the same talking. He's got the same thread. Okay, Iran's Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei on Saturday condemned a U.S. blueprint to end the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians and calling on the Hajj pilgrims to oppose it. The Iranian state media reported. The trick is called the deal of the century, which is being pushed by an oppressive America and its traitorous companions. This guy must be a Democrat. It is a crime against human society, not just against the Palestinian people. State television quoted Khamenei as saying in a message to the Muslim pilgrims performing their annual Hajj in Saudi Arabia.
Did you
So-
see their tents?
What's that?
Did you see their tents? Beautiful white tents. They're all of them pink. They're all just white. They have that kind of money for tents. Why are they having so many refugees living in tents?
Well, now there's an interesting question. I don't know. But this Hajj is pretty interesting too. You know what that is? You know,
Yeah.
That's
Just to Mecca.
They go around Mecca and you got to walk around an old meteorite for 7 times or some such thing as that. And then you take rocks and go throw them at Satan in a river somewhere. And that constitutes your obligation for life. Really, you have to do that one time. At least one time. I remember once they got that Hajj and a whole bunch of them were running around in a circle and somebody fell down and that knocked somebody else down. They killed about 100 people. They all got stomped on. I mean, that is crazy.
What a great target.
Is that the black cube?
What? That's the black cube. It's a meteor. It's an old meteor is what it is. A black rock. Boy, oh boy. So, just a passage from Luke chapter 17. And as it was in the days of Noah, so it will be also in the days of the Son of Man. Well, how was it in the days of Noah? Everything going fine there?
No.
Everything was going downhill in a hurry, right? I mean, it was interesting in the days of Noah, if you'll recall, the reason Noah and his family were rescued was because he was perfect in his generations. Literally, that meant he was genetically pure, which means that all the people in the region were not genetically pure. They were, what? Probably is. Well, the difference is they were inbred by the Nephilim, which were the fallen angels. And so that's the way God cleaned up the area. He wiped them all out. So they ate, they drank, they married wives, and they were given in marriage. That means they were marrying, giving in marriage, getting divorced, and marrying again, until the day Noah entered into the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. That's interesting.
Hey, Carl,
What?
Noah was telling them people to build the ark because God would have a lot of rain, but they didn't know what rain was.
Yes, as a matter of fact, we have a mechanism now. We understand it now, at least better than we ever understood it before. 12,068 years ago, our sun novaed, and that means it blew up. It blew the outer skin off of it, and the intense radiation and heat from that vaporized 1,000 foot of water off of the oceans. And that water went up and suspended itself in the atmosphere of the Earth. And for a long time, there was no wind on planet Earth. And over years, the water began to condense, rain, and if you look in the basins of all of the oceans, you will see paths where water has flowed down the path into the bottom of the basin, which means the basin was empty. Otherwise, the water would never have made those paths in it. So what we have now is the mechanism through which the Earth was completely covered in vapor for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And then some event came along eventually and hit the planet Earth and caused that water, that cloud, that vapor to condense. And that was probably the first time in about 10,000 years that humankind had seen the sun. And then, of course, mankind originally, they all lived hundreds of years old. But when the sun came out, all of a sudden their lifespan dropped off dramatically because they were exposed to ultraviolet radiation and all kinds of other radiations. And so then it said that the limits on man's existence was 120 years, and then it dropped even further down to 70.
I wish we had the vapor now, because my grass is turning yellow. That would be nice and green.
Hey, a new world is on the way because a new solar nova is imminent. So moving right along before we get through with the lesson, and I haven't got to the lesson yet. They ate, they drank, they married wives, they were given in marriage until the day Noah entered the ark and the flood came and destroyed them all. There is a parallel here, and the parallel is Noah is just like the church. Symbolic. That was the word. Thank you. Thank you. You need to come up here. Symbolic of the church in the sense that when the church leaves, what happens? All hell breaks loose on earth. But as long as we are still here, that day can't come, according to 2 Thessalonians chapter 2.
Amen.
And then likewise as it was in the days of Lot. They ate, they drank, they bought, they sold, they planted, they built. But on the day that Lot went out from Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. Even so it will be in the day the Son of Man is revealed. So we've got all of this evil stuff that's going on planet Earth right now, but there is a restrainer here yet, and that restrainer is the Holy Spirit, and through whom does the Holy Spirit work, and that is with the church, me and thee. And as long as we are still here, the Holy Spirit is still here, a complete disaster is on hold.
Praise the Lord.
Yep, and as soon as we are gone, well, fire and brimstone fell from heaven and destroyed them all. It's going to be pretty much like that. So hopefully we don't have too long to wait, because I'm really getting tired of waiting personally. Oh, by the way, I went to visit my dermatologist this week, and as you can tell from my face, he didn't like my face much.
No.
You probably know my dermatologist by another name, the Marquis de Sade. Yes, Vlad the Impaler. David and Goliath, 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered their armies together to battle, and they were gathered at Sochach, which belongs to Judah, and they were encamped between Sochach and Azekah in the Ephes Damim. Boy, they've got some words there that are tongue twisters. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and they encamped in the valley of Elah and drew up in battle array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on one side, and Israel stood on a mountain on the other side, and with a valley in between them. That's kind of where we are. There's the Valley of Elah. Notice the 5 cities of the Philistines there. And that's the general region. You see the Dead Sea over there. By the way, how do you spell, or when you're talking about the Philistines, what's their name in ancient Latin? That's it. Palestinians. That's where the word came from. And so that's what happened when the Roman general, no, he wasn't a general, he was the Caesar. When when they had the Bar Kokhba rebellion, he lost a lot of men to the Jews, and that's when they kicked them out of the land, called it the diaspora, and Jews all got kicked out. And then he sowed salt in the soil around Jerusalem so it wouldn't grow anything. And then he named the place after the enemies of the Jews, which were the Philistines. And he called it Palestine. That's where they're. And a champion went out from the camp of the Philistines named Goliath from Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. He's about 10 feet tall. Be a good NBA player. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat of mail was 5,000 shekels, about 125 pounds. That's a lot of weight.
Coat of mail, chain mail.
Chain mail.
What about the spear? I think it weighed lots and lots.
Yeah, he had bronze armor on his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. Now, the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam. I don't know what a weaver's beam is, never saw one. And his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels, 15 pounds. And a shield bearer went before him. The guy had so much armor, he couldn't even carry his shield. There was an argument that one guy made that, well, you know, this really wasn't a fair fight between David and Goliath, because Goliath, being big and tall like that, was probably slow of brain and slow of motion. But if you'll recall this, huh?
He was a tough dude.
Yeah, but if you remember the story of the giant of Kandahar, when that was reported, that one of these Nephilim types they ran across, they said the guy was faster than a linebacker. And he killed one of their men before they shot him full of holes. And so apparently that's not the case. These things are fast. So at any rate, he stood and cried out to his armies of Israel and said to them, "Why have you come out to line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and you the servants of Saul? Choose a man for yourselves and let him come down to me. And if he is able to fight with me and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, you shall be our servants and serve us." You think he really meant that?
No.
I think he did, because he was very confident.
Well, he was confident he could kill anybody, right? But it's just like Trump and Hillary. Nobody thought that anybody was going to beat Hillary. Isn't that just like God to pull a stunt like that? And the Philistines said, "I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together." So when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were totally dismayed and greatly afraid. And David, the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, what is an Ephrathite? Somebody from the tribe of Ephraim, whose name was Jesse, who had 8 sons, and the man was old, advanced in years in the days of Saul. The 3 oldest sons, Jesse, had gone to follow Saul into battle, and their names of the 3 sons who went into battle were Eliab, the firstborn. Next to him was Abinadab, and the third was Shammah. And David was the youngest of the 3 oldest who followed Saul. Huh?
It seemed like he was the smallest. And they also said he was a blush. I'm thinking maybe he had red hair and freckles, but he didn't say that for sure. But
Well, they called him Rudy, as we'll get here in a second. But David occasionally went and returned to Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem, and the Philistines drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and Then Jesse said to his son David, now take for your brothers an ephah of this dried grain and these 10 loaves, and run to your brothers at the camp. And carry these 10 cheeses to the captain of the thousands, and see how your brothers fare, and bring back news of them. And now Saul and they and all the men of Israel were in the valley of Elah fighting with the Philistines. So David rose up early in the morning, left the sheep with the keeper, and took the things and went as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the camp as the army was going out to fight and shouting for battle. For Israel and the Philistines had drawn up in battle array, army against army. And David left his supplies in the hand of the keeper, and ran to the army, and came and greeted his. Then, as he talked to them, there was the champion of the Philistines of Gath, Goliath by name, coming up from the armies of the Philistines, and he spoke according to the same words, so David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and they were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who has come up? Surely he has come to defy Israel, and it shall be that that man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, and give him his daughters, and give him his father's house, an exemption from taxes in all Israel. Boy, that's an incentive, isn't it? Then David spoke to the men who stood by him, saying, what shall be done for the man who kills this Philistine and takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Amen. And the people answered him in this manner, saying, so shall it be done for the man who kills him. And Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. And he said, why did you come down here? And with whom have you left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know your pride and the insolence of your heart, for you have come down to see the battle. I don't know why he's so mad at David, but David's sitting here commenting on the obvious. Gee, are we not the armies of... Why are you letting this go on? And David said, why? What have I done now? Is there not a cause? Then he turned from him toward another and said the same thing. And these people answered him as the first ones did. Now, when the words which David spoke were heard, they reported them to Saul, and he sent for him. Then David said to Saul, let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine. Now there is the height of arrogance. A little bitty young kid is going to go out there with a slingshot and fight this guy who's got 130 pounds of armor on and a spear that's... Well, Saul said to David, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are just a youth, and he is a man of war from his youth. But David said to Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard and struck it and killed it. Now, you got to admit, that's pretty impressive. I don't know that I would want to be out there with a slingshot taking on a lion. But I'm sure Saul was saying, sure you did. But your servant has killed both a lion and a bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God. Well, David has a point, and I got a feeling this is why David was the man after God's own heart. He did not see any obstacle at all here. Is there a God or is there not? And if there is a God and he's the God of Israel, what are we waiting for? Yeah.
You know, God used David, a real small person. It reminds me of this king says, if there is a God struck me by lightning, he didn't use lightning, he used a little bitty gnat. Went in his mouth and killed him. So small.
Well, it goes to show you, if you defy God, God have mercy on you because, well, God is pretty powerful. I mean, he spoke and his words literally formed the universe. And if he has got that kind of power, you know, it says in the Bible that he cannot tell a lie.
That's Right.
And it's not so much that he is so moral that he can't tell a lie. It's because anytime he speaks, his words define truth.
That's right.
Because the whole universe follows. Whatever he says, it happens. So, moreover, David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear, he will deliver me from the hand of this stinking Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. You know, get out of here. But I'm not going, but you go down there and take care of him. And so Saul clothed David with his armor and put on a bronze helmet on his head and clothed him with a coat of mail. The kid was so weighed down he couldn't move. And so David fastened his sword to his armor and tried to walk, for he had not tested them. And David said to Saul, I can't walk with these, for I have not tested them. So David took them off. And so he took his staff in his hand and he chose for himself 5 smooth stones from a brook. Why 5 stones? Was he a bad shot? Yeah.
Because Goliath had 4 brothers, and David thought if he doesn't get Goliath after he gets Goliath, he might have to fight every one of those brothers. And he took 5 stones and he killed every one of them.
Well, that's interesting.
That's confidence.
So he wasn't so much worried about just one giant. I may have to fight all 5 of them. Hey, boy, you talk about confidence. I mean, he didn't take 10, like 2 for each. Hey, I only need 1.
One shot each.
Well, there's another theory behind that. The word 5, the Hebrew word yod has a gematria, a numerical value of 5. And anytime you see the word yod by itself, it is implied yod Adonai, which is the hand of God. He took 5 probably because of his 4 other brothers, but also because he was acting as the hand of God. And also, we'll see later, there are 5 cities in which the Philistines occupied. Maybe there's a prophecy in here somewhere. Let's see. At any rate, and he put them in a shepherd's bag in a pouch which he had, and a sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. So the Philistine came and began drawing near to David. And the man who bore the shield went before. And when the Philistine looked and saw David, he disdained him, for he was only a youth, ruddy and good looking. Maybe he was redheaded. I don't know.
Wasn't Gary then.
So the Philistine said to David, am I a dog that you have come to me with a stick? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. What was one of the gods of the Philistines? Anyone remember? Well, it was Beelzebub.
Oh, that's right.
Why would they name a god after flies? Let's check into that here in a minute. And the Philistine said to David, come to me, and I will give your flesh to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. Well, guess what?
Didn't happen.
His words came right back to him. And David said to the Philistine, come to me with a sword and a spear and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I will strike you and take your head from you. Ooh, them some mighty tall words. Pardon me. Mighty tall words. And this day I will give the carcasses of the camp of the Philistine to the birds of the air and the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. This David was pretty convinced, wasn't he, that there was a God in Israel and that he was capable of doing anything. So, then all this assembly shall know that the Lord does not save you with sword or spear for battle, for it is the Lord's, and he will give you into. And so it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine. Then David put his hand in his bag, took out a stone, and he flung it. And it struck the Philistine in his forehead, so that the stone sank into his forehead, and he fell on his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling, a stone, and struck the Philistine and killed him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran and stood over the Philistine and took his sword and drew it out of its sheath and killed him and cut off his head. with it. And the Philistines saw that their champion was dead. They fled. They reneged on the deal, didn't they? No, you can't trust them
They
Philistines.
refused to honor a duly appointed and elected official.
Democrats.
See a parallel there?
Will you honor the terms and the outcome of this election? Well, what happened?
To this day,
And what has the left done? They failed to honor the outcome of the election.
Palestine is against Israel. They won't honor that they lost the battle.
They won't. Isn't it strange how we can find all sorts of prophecy in this passage? Then the men of Israel and Judah arose, shouted, and pursued the Philistines as far as the entrance to the valley and the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell along the road of Sha'arim as far as Gath and Ekron. And the people, and then the children of Israel returned from chasing the Philistines, and they plundered their tents. So, at any rate, there are the 5 cities, 5 stones, 5 cities in the area of Palestine. And to this day, who occupies that area? The Palestinians, right? The Philistines are still there.
I think maybe Goliath's other brothers guarded the other cities too.
They must have.
All 5 of them.
Champions are there. Cities.
Then the burden of the Lord, and for me, this is Zechariah chapter 9, the burden of the Lord against the land of Hadrach and Damascus, its resting place, for the eyes of men and all the tribes of Israel are on the Lord. Also against Hamath. Where have we heard that word before? You ever heard of Hamas? Which borders on it, and against Tyre and Sidon, though they are very wise. For Tyre built herself a tower and heaped up silver like dust and gold like the mountains. And behold, the Lord will cast her out, will destroy her power in the sea, and she will be devoured by fire. You remember what happened to Tyre? Alexander the Great came along, and, Tyre had been attacked once before. And Tyre originally was on the seacoast of Lebanon. And they got attacked and almost overrun. And so they decided that we're going to build our city offshore. So the next time some horde comes through here, they won't be so easy to get to us. So they built their city out here on an island just offshore. Alexander the Great comes along, and he sees their city out there and their abandoned city on the shore. So he decides, well, I'm going to get them. So he took the city that was intact but unoccupied, took the stones, threw them out into the sea, and built a causeway out, attacked Tyre, and destroyed them. This passage here, behold, the Lord will cast her out, he will destroy her power in the sea, and she will be devoured by fire. That's exactly what happened. The whole city got thrown out into the ocean, and the other end of the city got burned up by fire by Alexander the Great. This passage was fulfilled to the detail. Then Ashkelon shall see it and fear. Gaza shall also be very sorrowful, and Ekron, for he dried up her expectation, and the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. And a mixed race shall settle in Ashdod, and shall be cut off, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines.
Amen.
Well, guess what? There's a mixed race right now in Ashdod. And I will take away the blood from his mouth and the abominations from between his teeth, but he who remains, even he shall be for our God, and he shall be a leader in Judah, and Ekron will be like a Jebusite. When the Lord comes here, things are going to change around. The Philistines are no longer going to be enemies, but they're going to be on the Lord's side. And I will camp around my house because of the army, because of him who passes by and him who returns. No more shall an oppressor pass through them, for now I have seen with mine eyes. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem, for behold, your king is coming, and he is just and having salvation, lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, a foal of a donkey. And we know that was fulfilled, right?
Amen.
But then it says, I will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow will be cut off, and he shall speak peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea and from river to the ends of the earth. And as for you also, because of the blood of the covenant, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pits, and return to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today I declare that I will restore double. So then the Lord will be seen over them, and his arrow will go forth like lightning, and the Lord God will blow the trumpet and go with the whirlwinds from the south. The Lord of hosts will defend them. He will devour and subdue with sling stones. Prophecy here is these Philistines are going to be destroyed with sling stones, just like David destroyed the Philistine, the pride of the Philistines, with a stone. And they shall drink and roar as if with wine. They shall be filled with blood like basins, like the corners of the altar. And the Lord their God will save them in that day as the flocks of his people, for they shall be like jewels of a crown, lifted like a banner over his land. For how great is the goodness, and how great its beauty. Grain shall make the young men thrive, and new wine the young women. In other words, the passage goes through, Philistines are going to be destroyed again, and the Lord is going to use like sling stones to take care of the job, and then Israel will be great, be like a banner in the land, and the Jebusites, well, some of the descendants of the Philistines will be Jebusites. And then we do know that in Revelation it says that there will be stones that fall upon the men, and each of the stones will be about the weight of a talent, and it will be a great, exceedingly great hailstorm. And like Christina's pointed out, capital punishment in Israel is meted out by stoning. You get stoned for all kinds of things: adultery, murder, homosexuality, go down the list. Everything that is a capital offense, executed by stoning. Looks like nothing has changed here in the end times.
We got rid of that, didn't we?
Yeah. And then we note in Revelation, in verse 21 of 19, that the rest who were killed with a sword which proceeded from the mouth of him who sat on the horse, and all the birds were filled with their flesh. So the prophecy of Goliath, that Israel was going to be eaten by the birds of the air, is fulfilled on them. Their words came back to them. Have you seen any parallels in the short, brief tenure here of Trump, where the left has hurled an insult which came back and rested upon them?
Racist.
Yeah.
Because he knows everything that's going on. He knows all this, the intelligence coming in, and they don't know anything. So it's really easy to throw it back at them.
Well, it just seems like it happens every time they claim that it's a right-wing conspiracy. Who was it that went and performed all of these heinous crimes in the recent past here? Was it a right-winger or was it a left-winger? The guy in Alabama, or was it Alabama?
Dayton, Ohio.
Dayton, Ohio. That guy was an Antifa guy. He was a left-winger.
Notice they're wearing black shirts and khaki pants.
Yeah.
Notice that and the one that did the El Paso one was supposed to posted a big manifesto. A 20-year-old did not read it, And
Yeah, it was probably written
they
for him.
debunked it that he wrote it, but the news is still claiming, he wrote a manifesto.
Well, you've got the scenario has to be right, and if it's not right, well, we'll make it right.
Well, in my personal opinion, the media is controlled by the Prince of the Airways.
Sure.
In that statement. And he is using them as his tool, and he spreads nothing but lies. He is not capable of telling the truth.
He's not capable of it.
Under control of.
And they're owned by like 5 companies. Disney is one of them. And they can tell. I'm sorry, but you know that Obama passed a propaganda law, and I think it's still in effect. He passed it right in December of 2016, so that it would rest on Trump. The government and news thinks it's legal for them to tell you whatever they want to tell you. I know that sounds outrageous.
Well, that sounds like an
How did you
executive
pass a
order.
law?
That's not a law, that's an executive
Whatever,
order.
yeah, that's what it was.
And Trump can rescind that and probably
Well, no, we
has.
can't, because the courts will object.
Yeah, one guy can do anything he wants, the other guy can't do anything to
This is
undo it.
not propaganda law.
Well, I noticed something rather interesting I thought I'll pass on to you here, and that is in Exodus chapter 20, it said that when the people were gathered around Mount Sinai, it says all the people witnessed thunderings, lightning, flashes, sound of the trumpet, and the mountain was smoking. And all the people saw it, and they trembled and stood afar. Worlds in Collision chapter 4, in the Hesiod, the huge earth groaned when Zeus lashed Typhon with its bolts. Now, to those you don't remember, Typhon was the name given to Nibiru at the time of its first arrival here around 1450 AD. And the earth resounded terribly in the wide heaven above. And Homer depicted this occurrence in these words: the wide earth rang, and round about great heaven pealed as with a trumpet. Now, the reason I'm bringing this up, well, let me finish here. It says, the world burns at the blast of the horn, it says in the Voluspa. And the Papyrus Ipuar calls these years the years of noise, years of noise. There is no end to the noise. Oh, that the earth would cease from the noise of the tumult, and the uproar might be no more. When this thing came by, the earth was twisted in the lithosphere, the upper surface of the planet was being twisted around, made terrific noise, sounded like a trumpet. Now here's the story. When Velikovsky wrote this, Velikovsky was not a theist. He did not believe that there was a God. He believed that all of these things that happened to the Jews and happened on earth were just natural coincidences, and that this planet that apparently came by earth was just one of those things. And God looks like he gives you the opportunity at every case that you can either believe that God designed it that way or that this is just an accident of nature. And those people who believe that there is a God, boy, what a bunch of suckers those people are. They don't know what they're talking about. This is all just nature. Of course, the word nature, that's really God. There is no such thing. And in the Chinese writing, Shu King attributed to Confucius, it is written, examining into antiquity, we find that Emperor Yao, who was called Fang Hun, Yao was a surname given to him at the time following the flood, apparently inspired by the sound of the earth's groanings. In the Western Hemisphere, the Indians of Puget Sound remarked, all mankind lifted the sky, little by little, shouting, Yahoo, which rang over the whole world. This trumpet sound sounds like Yahoo.
Reckon that's Yahoo got his name.
Well, you know, the word Yahweh, we don't really know how to pronounce it. It could have been pronounced Yahoo, or it could have been pronounced Yahuwah. We don't know how it's pronounced. Yeah. And at the time that these catastrophes were occurring, there were flies which came into the land. Now, to those who live in Egypt and that region know that when there is a sirocco, you know what a sirocco is? It's a Volkswagen. No, it's a hot wind that blows off the desert. About 2 days after you get a sirocco, it's followed up by flies. Somehow this causes the flies to breed. And at the time of Nibiru, there was a hot wind for a long time, and that's what caused the flies. And in Ekron, in the land of the Philistine, there was erected a magnificent temple to Baal Zebub, the god of the fly. In the 9th century BC, King Ahasuerus of Jezreel, after he was injured in an accident, sent his emissaries to ask advice of this god at Ekron, and not to the oracle at Jerusalem. Baal Zebub is Baal-zebub of the Gospels. But the point is, hey, these flies came about in massive numbers because the whole atmosphere was disrupted at the coming of this Nibiru. Yes.
I got a question. We all know David's life. When he was a shepherd, he was a warrior. He followed Saul. He won many battles. And some Christians will say, well, I want power and I want wealth. What happened to David when he got power and wealth? He went down, 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 down.
What is it that they say? Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. The most magnificent king we ever had, or ever known about on planet Earth, his name was Solomon. And what happened to him? Man, the guy started out as a man of God, and God told him, don't marry any of those foreigner women, and he married about a couple hundred of them. I don't know how many he had. But he went after their gods, and he ended up in the toilet of history because of what he did. And his son...
But he did recognize, at the end, he recognized all of that. So I see it as somebody who started off close to God, went away, fell, and then at the end of his life,
He came back.
and he realized that.
Absolutely, but the point being that humankind is not designed to be a ruler or a king. There is only one person who's got that job, and if you're not really close to the Lord, and there were some who were, but most usually what happened was those who got in control the deepest, those were the ones who fell the farthest. And so the point, as you bring out, being a king of the land is not necessarily a good thing.
That's right.
It's the pride and the arrogance being shown.
Yeah, you would have to really be on your knees all the time. And it's been reported that Abraham Lincoln spent almost every morning on his knees because he recognized exactly his station in life, and it worried him.
But let's also remember from our sermon today, to the person who much is forgiven, much love is returned. So I would think, I know David loved the Lord with all his heart because he was forgiven for the evils that he did.
Mhm.
Solomon, the same thing. And there's a lot of people that way, and we all know Christians or so-called Christians
We're all
who
sinners.
look down on people whose lifestyle wasn't what they wanted before, and they say, oh, well, now they're a Christian. Yeah, and I bet they love the Lord more than you do because of what they've gone through.
Boy, that's a very good point, because it seems to me like God has, well, he knows who's going to be saved and who isn't. And he takes some people and drives them down so that they can experience what it's like to be completely without God at all. And then he brings them back up and lets them see the light. And you're right. What happens to those kind of people? Those are some of the best witnesses that we have. And we have got a time coming here where there's going to need to be some witnesses because the church is not going to be here anymore. And there will need to be some strong witnesses for the Lord. And at least 144,000 of those are coming from the 12 tribes of Israel. So, but there will be others too.
Speaking of Beelzebub, did you see those pictures of Hillary and Obama during the elections with flies all over them?
I didn't see that one, but I wish I had.
Well, there were several times a fly would land on their head. And,
Did the fly die?
and they didn't brush it away or anything. Like most people would go and get out of here.
Yeah, well, that means they're insensitive.